Hi and welcome into Criminology. And this time we're going to look at it's in their blood. That is to say, trait theory. Now, this chapter is going to introduce us to trait theory, but let's first determine what is a trait. If I ask you to describe yourself, you would likely do so in terms of traits such as I'm bright, I'm sophisticated, I'm smart, I'm witty. That's you, right? We also describe other people in terms of traits as well. So what are traits? Traits are reasonably stable elements of personality that are inferred from behavior. Now that just really means reasonably stable just means they can change a bit over time if you were so inclined or an event changed, affect you. And the inferred is just that I see the behavior, and unless you clarify for me, then I'm making an inference about what I think your behavior means, and that's what is a trait. So if you describe a friend as being shy, it may be because you have observed anxiety or withdrawal in that person's social encounters. Now, traits are assumed to account for consistent behavior in different situations. The more contemporary theories assume that traits are inheritable and are embedded in our nervous system. In this chapter, we're going to move from the general view of traits and apply this to the field of criminology. So let's begin. Criminologists assert that there are two parts of divisions of trait theory in criminology. There's a biological trait system and psychological traits of criminal behaviors or of criminal offenders which set them apart from non-criminals. They can be traced back to the early research of criminologist Cesar Lambarzo. And you can remember him from chapter 1, who was first introduced to us in chapter 1. This progression to a more contemporary view also gets more scientific methodology, and that's important in terms of the fact-based and evidence-based components. Now pay attention to what I'm saying here. Social biology, okay, sociobiology just looks at the social world and the biological connections. So sociobiology emerged in around the 1970s with a perspective that considered the relationship between biological and genetic conditions and the social behavior scene. Now that has been altered to now include the relationship between biology, the environment, that's a part of the social world, and learning, how we learn and how that biology and environment contributes to our learning. Now, contemporary trait theorists will still be considering offenders as physically and mentally unique. No longer do they suggest a single biological or psychological trait or attribute that is sufficient to explain all criminal behavior. Instead, they view crime-producing interactions as involving both personal traits, that could include things like impulsivity, personality, compromised intelligence. To look at those personal traits and environmental factors, that would include family life, the amount of education that you have, the neighborhood you live in, and biology, whether there's any abnormal brain biology chemistry. It is important to note that there is no guarantee that any of the elements that would support criminal behavior, biology, learning capacity, or the environment will materialize in everyone with the same condition. So it's important to note that there's no guarantees that if because you have these certain traits that you will in fact be a criminal. And that's not necessarily what this is all about, okay? So a poor neighborhood, low education, and impulsivity personality does not mean that they will engage in crime. It just increases the probability, but it does not assure. So we're going to begin by looking at the more biological trait theories first, And then we'll explore the psychological trait theories. And you'll see the biological theorist, figure 5.1, I think I put it up beside me here as well. It stresses the biological and biochemical conditions that control antisocial behavior, including chemical and mineral imbalances such as high levels of carbohydrates and sugars, hormonal influences, premenstrual syndrome for women, and environmental contaminants can all contribute to criminal behavior in some people. Now we're going to touch on each of these theories that fall under the biological, and we're going to start with the biochemical conditions in crime. Now this component is inclusive of both the genetically predetermined and the role of diet, interesting, and the environment and their impact of social behavior. So let's look at the diet element for a minute. That's kind of interesting. Now criminologists have noted the importance of the role of vitamins and minerals in our diet, especially in our early life. For some, it is this deficiency of some such elements like sodium, potassium, calcium, amino acids, monoamines, and peptides. Now these can impact some of us more significantly than others. Other research is looking at the role of such vitamins as vitamin B, B3, B6, C, and D. In addition, sugar and carbohydrates are also being looked at regarding aggressive behavior. It is important to note that many people living in lower income circumstances find it very difficult to eat healthfully. To eat according to the Canada Food Guide is costly, comparatively. Many low-income families will purchase low-cost alternatives that are very high in salt, fat, and sugar, and very low in essential nutrients. And that can contribute a lot to these lower-income families in low-income neighborhoods with fewer stable components, more transients. It can increase the likelihood for crime. Now we can touch on the hormonal influences here as well. Now this element is important as the role of hormones can be very significant. Many of the conditions for psychological disorders are based on hormonal imbalances. For example, on a genetic viewpoint, consider the genetic differences between a man and a banana. Well, there's 50% shared genetic material between a man and a banana. How about between a man and a chimpanzee? Less than 2% difference in genetics. So how much difference can there be between men and women? Well, less than 1% difference in genetic material. So much of what makes the differences are constructed by society, defining what is to be masculine and what it is to be feminine. Also, societies look to language. Language would be the words that support the societal perspective. And then, of course, it includes culture. Critical here is also the hormones. The picture in your text of Andreas Krieger is an example of the role of what steroids and other drugs which mimic hormones. Now, testosterone in particular. He was a female shot putter from East Germany in the 1980s and the 1990s. And she was given steroids and other drugs as a teen, and eventually the mimicked testosterone influenced dramatic masculine traits. She transitioned in 1997 to Andreas, who married another athlete affected by steroid use. Any women transitioning to male will take testosterone to affect all sorts of personality issues, including thinking, demeanor, and body changes. And so that testosterone can also increase in what is known as being aggressive behavior as well. So what about premenstrual syndrome or PMS? Well, the antisocial aggressive behavior can result from excessive amounts of female hormone during menstruation. This can certainly affect some women more than others. And the other one we touched on was environmental contaminants. copper, cadmium, mercury, and inorganic gases like chlorine and nitrogen dioxide, these can have effects on behaviors. Now, other researchers have focused attention on another area, the neurophysiological conditions, in their effort to explain criminal propensity and criminal behavior, such as attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, fetal alcohol syndrome, and various other neurotransmitter imbalances can contribute to criminality. Now, with the use of technology, we can see the brain at work now in a way that we've never been able to see before, with such technologies as CT, or computed tomography, MRI, magnetic resonance imagery, fMRI. Now that's functional magnetic resonance imagery. EEG, electroencephalogram. PET, positron emission tomography. BEAM, brain electrical activity mapping, and SQUID, superconducting quantum interface devices. Now, all of these technologies has enabled some additional insights about brain functioning, abnormalities, and impairments that can, for some, be more likely to commit criminal behavior, be antisocial, have impulse control issues. This can open us up to all sorts of other outcomes. Now, ADHD. About 3% of children, mostly boys, are affected by ADHD. Impulsivity, developmentally inappropriate lack of attention, hyperactivity can, for some, result in some deficiencies such as poor school resources, stubbornness, bullying. I was diagnosed with ADD when I was 42 years old. So I had a lot of youthful experiences that were undiagnosed. In fact, at that point in my life, they didn't know what ADD was or ADHD. So much of what what can occur for children did for me as well. I was poor in school performance, visited the principal's office pretty frequently, and it's not something that needs to affect one's life into crime. I didn't find my way into crime. I learned, if you will, how to compensate. Unbeknownst to me, really. It wasn't something I consciously did until later in my life, and my ADD still is I was able to attend university, graduated, and hold a long career in many different career choices. So I've been pretty fortunate, and so can others. So these are no guarantees. FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. Now this emerged in the early 70s as more and more examples of infants with mothers who had a history of alcoholism. Along with this was the awakening that the impact of infants had both staying power and antisocial and aggressive behaviors, and a lack of awareness of consequences for their behaviors. And it got many young people into a lot of trouble because they just don't see and understand the consequences in many cases. The next group we can look at is what's known as acquired brain injury. Now, this category is divided into two types of acquired brain injury. There's the non-traumatic. Now, this is something that happens inside your body. Perhaps you've had a stroke or a tumor, and that would be non-traumatic, whereas the traumatic brain injuries would be more like a typical experience would be a concussion. And you don't want to have too many of those. And this sort of damage can affect criminality, and again, there is no guarantee that it will. Not everybody with a concussion will become a criminal. Brain chemistry. What role can brain chemistry play? Well, this incorporates the role of neurotransmitters, and again, these are very important. Neurotransmitters can include serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, monoamine oxidase, which is MAO-A, and GABA. Now, these transmitters influence many areas of our reality. Drugs can be administered to either increase or decrease a neurotransmitter, aiming at leveling them out to what would be a normal level. Now, in this area still, we can touch on what's known as arousal theory. This is still under biological. And arousal theory suggests that everyone has an optimal or a preferred level of arousal. And this can depend on what activities that we're engaged in, whether we're stimulated adequately to complete the task and experience no stress, or not being bored. So there's a level of arousal that whatever the task, easy, medium, or hard, that we need in order to achieve success in that. We're not all wired the same. Therefore, some may need more arousal to achieve a normal level. Another biosocial theme is that the human traits associated with criminality have a genetic basis, which leads into an analysis of parental deviance. That indicates, whether parents were just poor parents, twin behavior, and adoption studies. And I'll give you some more information on that. So for example, twin research demonstrates a stronger relationship between the criminal behavior of identical twins than between fraternal twins. And that would make sense because identical twins have identical DNA, whereas fraternal twins are like two individual people just happen to be born at the same time. And the behavior of adopted children is more similar to that of their biological parents than their adoptive ones. Now this in a way, I guess, demonstrates the argument of nature, which is genetics, and nurture, which is environment or family. Now lastly, we can consider the evolutionary view of crime. Now evolutionary view, they describe the advancement of human traits that produce violence and aggression over a period of long historical human evolution. Similarly, evolutionary concepts have been proposed in an effort to link gender and crime. In this view, more aggressive males reproduce quickly and often with many different partners, while females have fewer offsprings and search for a single nurturing partner for the purpose of safety and stability. Now, this is going to bring to a conclusion, or let's sort of look at the biological trait theory portion of Chapter 5. A major concern with the biological approach by criminologists has been the tendency to be racist. As it became popular notion, the eugenics movement emerged. And here's how the thinking goes. If crime is disproportionately committed by poorly fed, lower education, and minorities, the tendency is then to see them as these people, therefore as inferior, inadequate, and biologically different. And this was the case in Canada back in the 50s. It's not a current perspective, and it's an important distinction to make. Okay, then that brings us to the end of part 1. And in part 2, we're going to explore the psychological trait theories as it relates to this chapter. Alrighty, everybody. See you in part 2. Bye now.